Religions are like pure rain, falling on earth and nourishing life. It brings about beautiful flowers, trees, and vegetation. In the same way rain is necessary for life, religion and morality are necessary to maintain peace, serenity, and hope. A Legacy of Peace is a documentary presentation that depicts the true nature of Islam and its relationship with the beliefs of other religions. Its primary goal is to clarify some of the misconceptions about the Islamic faith and set the stage for understanding and tolerance among all people and all religions. The components of the mission of the Prophet Muhammad, Islam's affirmation of Judaism and Christianity, Muhammad's rational approach to life as a whole will be discussed. The documentary will also speak about the issue of state versus religion, what jihad means, Muhammad's use of marriage to end tribal strife, and how Islam reformed the status of women's rights and their role in societies. These are some of the topics that will be discussed in this long-awaited film. To better understand Islam and how its philosophies evolved, we will walk you through many of the events leading to the rise of this faith, and more importantly, bridge the perceived gap between Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. Just as Judaism turns to Moses for their teachings, and the Christians believe that Jesus was sent by God, the Muslims believe that Prophet Muhammad received the revelation of Islam. In the early 600 AD, in the city of Mecca in the Arabian Peninsula, Islam was born to continue the religious traditions set out from the dawn of mankind. The Prophet Muhammad was from the Hashim clan of the Quraysh tribe that ruled the city during that time. In the early 7th century, Arabia was a harsh wilderness inhabited by people who mostly worshipped idols and were torn with endless tribal wars. Survival was mostly possible by tribal dominance. Nobody would have dreamed that this violent and terrifying region was about to give birth to a world religion that would soon bring about peace and create strong spiritual, intellectual, social, and political reforms. In her book, Muhammad, a biography of the Prophet, Karen Armstrong stated, "When Muhammad brought his revelation to his people, Arabia was outside the civilized world, and its political and social order was disintegrating. There was an urgent need for a new political solution, and in the 7th century, such a solution would inevitably be religious." From an early age, Muhammad was known to be passionate, trustworthy, and spiritually gifted. He would often reflect and withdraw to a cave near Mecca called Cave Hira to ponder and meditate. At the age of 40, during one of his retreats, Muslims believe Archangel Gabriel appeared to him with a message from God. He said to him, "O Muhammad, read." Muhammad was terrified. He said, "I cannot read." Archangel Gabriel repeated, "O Muhammad, read." Muhammad replied, "But I cannot read." Then he took Muhammad into his arms and recited, "Read, in the name of your Lord, who created man from a clinging substance. Read, and your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man that which he knew not." Thus started Islam's revelation with the word read, and the revelation continued to occur periodically over a period of 23 years, which formed the Holy Quran. As a result of this revelation, rationality, spirituality, trade, science, and art thrived in the region to create the Golden Age of Islam. Out of this Golden Age of Islam grew the seeds of the Renaissance, the beginning of Europe's escape from the Dark Ages, where reason and knowledge were rejected.
Was told to use intellectual capacity. It means reason. Use your reason. So that had such, can you imagine the impact if we knew today that in religion we're supposed to use reason? In the matters of faith, if we don't use our reason, we'll be lost. That's the contribution that Islam gave, and that's why it changed civilization. No one before said use your reason. Before it was repression based on the priesthood or the hierarchy, the church. Whoever was in control didn't want the common people to learn about things. They wanted to protect their interests.
During the great Muslim empires, the Christian world was going through its dark ages. And this shifts tremendously when the Christian world comes out of the Dark Ages, because indeed the Christian world looks to that great Islamic heritage and past to learn about the great philosophers of the West. In many ways, it was the Muslim sages that passed on knowledge of Greek philosophy, and not only passed on that knowledge of Aristotle and Plato and Plotinus, but actually passed on and enhanced and developed form, so that it then becomes possible for the great sages of Christendom, whether it's Aquinas or Bonaventure or Albert the Great and many others, to in fact be seen as building on, if you will, their Muslim masters, their Muslim teachers.
The Arabic word Islam is related to Silm and Salam. It means peace and a wholesome surrender to God.
It is in the Quran that the religion is Islam. We translate this to English, that the religion with God is to surrender to God.
The submission to the will of God is profoundly natural and is in harmony with the divine laws of existence. Muslims believe everything in the natural world, including man, submit to God. Animals, flowers, trees, winds, oceans, fish, earth, moon, and heavens do not have a choice about whether to submit to God or not. Muslims believe man alone was given the faculty of choice. Those who choose to submit to God willingly, their submission comes in harmony with nature. But those who repulse the guidance of God will be returning to Him in submission and death, despite their unwillingness in life. Muslims believe that all heavenly religions have sprung from the one fountain of Almighty God. And with this deeply held belief, Islam enforces the beliefs at the core of Judaism and Christianity. Say, we believe in God and what has been revealed to us, and what was revealed to Abraham, Ishmael, Isaac, Jacob, and their descendants, and in what was given to Moses and Jesus and to the prophets from their Lord. We make no distinction between any of them, and we are Muslims, submitting to Him. Quran 384.
Islam is the culmination of the Abrahamic religions. We Muslims consider that Islam is the continuity of the previous Abrahamic religions in this final form of Islam.
To Muslims, Muhammad is the last prophet, continuing the message of Moses and Jesus Christ.
Muhammad emerges within Islam as the final prophet. His example is such within the Muslim community that popularly he's often referred to as the living Quran. That is, he is the model, his practice, his sunnah, what the prophet said and did.
The Arabic word Allah is the proper name for God, Lord of the creation, maker and sustainer of this universe and beyond. God, or Allah, has many attributes. Some of these attributes are the granter of peace and mercy, the patient, the pure, the forgiver, the compassionate, the judge, and the wise. Muslims believe from the unity of God comes the unity of the universe and the unity of religion. From this unity stems the fraternity of all people and all beliefs.
Everything is created by the one God, and so for Muslims, the idea is that all people come from the same roots.
Prophet Muhammad said, "None of you will be a true believer unless he loves for his fellow believer what he loves for himself." Although Islam was born in the height of recorded history in the early 600s, it is one of the most misunderstood religions. There are many unfound myths surrounding Islam that cause fear, confusion, and misinterpretation. Some believe the reason for this misunderstanding comes from the fact that most of the other religions do not teach Islam in their sermons, and vice versa.
I am a bit taken aback to discover that I'm 53 years old and I've been an ordained minister in the Christian church for 19 years, and my education about Islam is beginning today. That all through my lifetime and all through my life as a Christian and my training to be an ordained minister, I did not have exposure to the Islamic tradition, the Islamic faith, the sacred texts of Islam. I had very little opportunity to interact with people who practiced the Muslim faith, and so I feel like I'm at a beginning stage.
The Quran is a complete code of guidance and the source of spiritual nourishment, healing, and mercy for all believers. It stands today as it was revealed to Prophet Muhammad in its original state. All three of the major religions have a book that helps them interpret the will of God. For the Muslims, this book is the Quran. The Quran describes the teachings of Prophet Muhammad in three major categories: the Holy Quran, or Al-Kitab, wisdom, hikmah, and inner self-purification, tazkiyah. These three fundamental categories supplement one another. The first, Al-Kitab, produces a person with a knowledge that the Prophet wanted to bestow on all Muslims. This knowledge includes the basis of sciences, the fundamentals of Islam, its beliefs, laws, and the stories and lessons from the earlier prophets. The second, wisdom, functions to produce a people who are successful in running their lives, affairs, and businesses. The third category, inner self-purification, tazkiyah, is an institution whose function is to produce humble and pious people. The three fundamentals combine to make up the ingredients necessary to make a true believer. The wisdom is a management tool that utilizes cause and effect as a guide in producing the desired and just result. It teaches the Muslim to do what is right and appropriate at the right time and in the right place.
Al-Hikmah, the wisdom, is to do the right thing in the right manner, in the right place.
To Muslims, at the center of the soul and conscience is the heart. God addressed Prophet Muhammad saying that he will accept those who turn to him in penitence, those who believe, and whose hearts find completion in the remembrance of Allah. For without doubt in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find comfort.
In the Quran, talking about the mission of the prophets, that their main goal was to teach the book, the wisdom, and the tazkiyah, the purification of the heart.
When the heart is cleansed from all vices and enlightened by the guidance of Allah, the rest of the body and all the senses will follow accordingly. Muslims believe that the faith in the heart wears out, just as clothes do, and that dhikr, or the recollection of Allah, renews the faith in the heart. The Prophet said, "Indeed, everything can be polished, and the polish of the hearts is dhikrullah, or the remembrance of Allah."
Serenity is a result of contemplation and zikr. If we think from our heart, then our heart becomes our conscience.
During the period Muhammad was receiving his revelation on Mount Hira, he started calling his people to worship the one God, Allah, and stop worshiping idols. He was rejected just as Moses and Jesus were during their times. Only a few followed his call. The Prophet and those who did follow him soon became Quraysh's targets of attacks, humiliation, torture, and persecution. Several Muslims were tortured to death. Some of the followers of Muhammad's were slaves and servants who were tortured and killed by their masters. In response to the torture against his followers, Prophet Muhammad did not follow what was common in Arabia, which was to retaliate with violence. Instead, he and some of his companions purchased the servants and slaves and set them free. To further minimize violence in a civilized manner, Prophet Muhammad conducted his meetings with his companions secretly at the house of Ibn al-Arqam. He asked his followers not to openly proclaim their faith while they were amongst the Meccans and the Quraysh tribe. As a result of several pagans' attacks on the Muslims as they performed their prayers at the Kaaba, Prophet Muhammad asked his companions to read their formal prayers silently instead of loudly, so as not to provoke Quraysh and cause violence. The evening and early morning time prayers were kept unchanged, since they are mostly performed in privacy. Some believe that Prophet Muhammad modified the form of worship for the purpose of eliminating hostility and violence. As a sign of reverence for the Prophet's actions, Muslims all over the world perform their noon and afternoon prayers silently.
This simple act is substantial proof of Islam's policy of establishing peace and preventing vehement actions.
This also shows that he was very careful about the sensitivities of the people.
For the next few years, the Quraysh tribe intensified their offense against the Muslims. The Prophet feared for the lives of his followers, so he started looking for protection and alliances. The closest to him was the Christian monarch of Abyssinia, King Asmaha Negus.
When Muslims were persecuted in Mecca, the Prophet told his followers that here the life is difficult for you, but then in another part, in Africa, in Abyssinia, there is a ruler who is very just. He's a Christian, but he's very just. His name was Najashi or Negus, and the Prophet said, why not migrate there? And you will find fair treatment in his state, in his government. And so many, almost 100 people migrated from Mecca to Abyssinia. And very interesting stories are mentioned that when they came there and people of Mecca, they sent some people to pursue them. And they went to the king and they told the king that there are people who ran away, some young people, they ran away from their homes, some slaves who ran away from their masters. We would like that you send them back. The king said, but I want to hear them. Let them come and speak. And when Muslim speaker spoke on behalf of other Muslims and explained what the message of Islam is, Najashi said, no, you have every right to practice your religion. And he allowed them to live there. And Muslims, they reciprocated with loyalty to that king. They were very loyal to the king, and they helped him in his battles with his enemies because they recognized this goodness that he did.
The Quran also speaks about the people of the book, who are Christians and Jews. Islam holds a special status for them, since they received revelations from God and believe in the day of reckoning.
Surah number 16, Allah says that when you discuss with the people of the book any matters, you discuss with them in a nice manner. Even when you argue with them in a nice manner. In Surah number 3, it says, قُلْ يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ تَعَالَوْا إِلَىٰ كَلِمَةٍ سَوَاءٍ. O people of the book, come, let us join our hands on common principles, on common values. This is what it says. In Surah number 60, Surah Al-Mumtahina, what does Allah say? Allah says, Allah does not forbid you from having good relations with those who do not fight you in the matters of your religion, do not expel you from your homes. Be nice to them. Islam emphasizes freedom. This Western society speaks a great deal about freedom. Freedom of expression, freedom of religion. The Quran says no compulsion in matters of religion.
The Quraysh tribal campaign against the Muslims expanded to a new dimension in the form of economic and social boycotts. 8 years after Muhammad's first revelation, the Quraysh tribe imposed a boycott on the Prophet and his family and forced them out of Mecca to an arid and dry valley known as the Abu Talib Valley. The siege went on for 28 long months. During this time, the family of the Prophet was not allowed to deal, trade, buy, sell, or socialize with the Quraysh tribe. The siege took its toll on the Prophet and his family. As a result, they had to eat the grass, insects, roots, and shrubs. Due to the harsh conditions imposed on them, some of his family fell ill. The Prophet's wife, Khadijah, died as a result, shortly after the boycott was removed. Shortly after that, his uncle Abu Talib also died. Their deaths were a direct result to the long years of malnutrition and hardship in exile. King Negus of Abyssinia sent a Christian delegation of 33 people to visit the Prophet and express their concern about the Muslims' condition. This visit may have been one of the elements that led to the elimination of the sanctions. When the delegation visited the Prophet in his exile, they were overwhelmed by the Quran text he recited to them and by his profound wisdom. Quraysh tribal leaders, however, insulted the Christian delegation for showing concern and sympathy for the Muslims. The delegation abstained from replying to Quraysh's insult For this occasion, Allah revealed these verses in Surah 28, verses 52 through 55, which read, "Those to whom we sent the book before this, they do believe in this revelation, and when it is recited to them, they say, 'We believed in it. Indeed, it is the truth from our Lord. Indeed, we have been Muslims bowing to God's will from before this. They will be given their reward twice for what they patiently endured, and because they avert evil with good, and from what we have provided them, they spend. And when they hear ill speech, they turn away from it and say, 'To us our deeds, and to you yours.'" Quran 28:52 through 55. The visit by the Abyssinian delegates exposed the inhumane treatment the Quraysh tribal leaders imposed on some of their people that they disagreed with. This visit may have awoken the conscience of a few of the Quraysh leaders, who agreed amongst themselves to stop the fool act of the boycott, and planned to call the rest of the people of Quraysh and its leaders into a public meeting at the Kaaba for the purpose of ending the banishment. As a result of this meeting, the ban was removed. The visit of the Christian delegation was indeed a good example of the genuine meaning of faith. Having lost his wife and uncle, Muhammad's exposure to Quraysh's harassment and assaults grew greater. In old Arabia, the governing law was that everyone is protected by belonging to a clan. The stronger the clan, the better the protection. For Muhammad, his father died before he was born, and his mother died when he was 6 years old. His guardianship moved to his grandfather at first. Then, when his grandfather died, it moved on to his uncle Abu Talib. Now that he lost his uncle and wife, he lost most of the protection of his clan. Being tired of Quraysh's assaults and rejection, Muhammad started looking for another chance for his cause outside of Mecca. The Prophet made a decision to go to Al-Taif, 150 kilometers south of Mecca, in the hope of finding a stronger collaboration from its people. It must have been horribly painful for Muhammad to have made such a decision. He knew that if he left the city, his life would be endangered by the lawless Arabia, and that if he had to return to Mecca, he would have to find a new clan to protect him, which might not be possible. In Al-Taif, the Prophet was utterly turned down by the city's 3 leaders. One leader said to him, "If God sent you, I will tear down the hangings of the Kaaba." The second leader told him, "Couldn't God find anyone else other than you to send?" The third leader refused to meet with the Prophet, but sent his servant with this message, "I do not need to speak to you. For if you are a messenger from God as you claim, then you are too great of a person for me to address. And if you are a liar, it is not befitting for me to speak to you." Knowing the consequences if he returned to Mecca, Muhammad appealed to them to conceal the news of rejection from Quraysh or to allow him to stay among them. His plea was also rejected. Instead of the expected kindness, they turned loose their children to follow him and threw stones at him until his head was severely cut. He bled until the blood came out of his shoes. Just outside of town in a vineyard, the Prophet and his servant rested and prayed these words, "O my God, unto you I complain of my weakness, of my helplessness, and of my lowliness before men. O most merciful of the merciful, you are Lord of the weak, and you are my Lord. Into whose hands will you entrust me? Unto some far-off stranger who will ill-treat me? Or unto a foe whom you have empowered against me? I care not if your wrath is not on me." Upon this supplication, the Angel of Mountains came to the service of Prophet Muhammad, asking his permission to close the mountains on the people of Taif. But despite his deepest wounds of rejection, Muhammad replied, "No, God may bring from their offspring people who may testify to the oneness of God and worship Him." The Prophet was magnanimous. His zeal for peace and forgiveness indeed overpowered his personal anger and self-wounds. Testifying to this fact, God revealed, "And indeed you are of a great moral character." Quran 68:4. The Quran also said, "And we have not sent you, O Muhammad, but as a mercy to the worlds." Quran 21:107. Now, Muhammad had no other choice but bear the pain of rejection and humiliation and return to Mecca. The next task for him was to find protection in Mecca. He sent his servant Zayd with the names of several tribal leaders in the hope that one of them would accept the request. Only one, Al-Muti ibn Adi, who was an idolater, accepted the protection of the Prophet. For the next 3 years, Muhammad was under the protection of a disbeliever. As expected from the Prophet, who was sent to teach wisdom and rationality, he had to deal with the new circumstance differently. Now he would no longer speak low of their idols, nor would he introduce himself to Quraysh in the way and frequency he used to. Instead, he channeled his efforts to the people who visit Mecca, especially during the pilgrimage season. And this flexibility in approach seemed to be fruitful. For example, he met with some people from the city of Yathrib who were favorable to his call and accepted Islam. The few converted Yathrib Muslims went back to their people and made more converts. In the next pilgrimage season, 12 of them met secretly with the Prophet and made a covenant with him to act and live up to the highest of standards. He asked his companion, Musab ibn Umair, to go with them and be his ambassador in Yathrib. In Yathrib, the Prophet's ambassador and the 12 Yathrib Muslims were successful in introducing Islam in the city. In the next year's pilgrimage to Mecca, 70 Yathrib Muslims met again, secretly with the Prophet, and made a pact with him to live righteously and give him protection. The Prophet had them select 12 representatives from amongst themselves, possibly reflecting their corresponding tribes, to report to Musab. Under this leadership, the Yathrib Muslim community soon became a significant power. Now, the scale of the relative power between the Quraysh tribe and the Muslims had begun to shift in favor of the Muslims. 11 years after the first revelation, the miraculous journey of the Prophet to Jerusalem and his ascension to the 7 heavens took place. In this remarkable journey, Muhammad met with his brother prophets, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and all other prophets sent by God, and he led them in a prayer in Jerusalem. From Jerusalem, he ascended to the 7 heavens, again meeting with the prophets. It was here he received the Muslim duties of the 5 daily prayers. Muhammad's meetings with all the prophets demonstrates the close ties and common grounds between Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, as well as other revealed religions. Since the conditions for the Muslims in Yathrib was far better than that of Mecca, most Meccan Muslims migrated to Yathrib to escape rejection and execution. They left behind their loved ones and belongings. Late in the 12th year, from the first revelation, the Prophet himself received inspiration to migrate to Yathrib. He instructed his close friend, Abu Bakr, to prepare 2 camels, food and supplies, and set them on standby for the journey. The Prophet also hired a travel guide for his convoy. Observing the Muslims' migration and success in Yathrib, Quraysh leaders were getting nervous and furious. Out of other options, they resorted to use more violence and plotted to kill Muhammad without the fear of reprisal from his clan, the Banu Hashim. The plot to kill Muhammad was to be carried out by a representative from each of Quraysh's clans, with each plunging his sword into him. In this way, the Prophet's clan would not be able to fight all of the clans of the Quraysh combined. The Prophet was informed by Allah of Quraysh's plan and gave Muhammad the permission to migrate to Yathrib. The Prophet told his close friend Abu Bakr, who was all too happy to accompany the Prophet in his journey. On the night of the journey, the Prophet instructed Asma, Abu Bakr's daughter, along with her brother Abdullah, to deliver food and the news of Koresh's plan to his hideout at Cave Thawr. He also instructed Abu Bakr's servant to graze a herd of sheep where the prophet's convoy and messengers walk, to destroy their footprints. This helped prevent Koresh's assassins from tracing their footprints to their hideout. On the night the murderers surrounded the prophet's house, Ali ibn Abi Talib, the prophet's cousin, offered to wrap himself in the prophet's cloak and lay in his bed, knowing that Koresh will not harm him. The prophet made his escape from Mecca along with Abu Bakr. To mislead the Meccans, who believed he would head north to join the rest of the Muslims in Yathrib, Muhammad and Abu Bakr headed south instead, to their hideout, the Cave Thawr. When the murderers entered Muhammad's house to kill him, they were disappointed to find out that it was Muhammad's cousin who was in the bed. The leaders of Mecca called for a wide search for Muhammad and offered 100 camels as a reward to the one who apprehended him. This lucrative reward attracted many people to search for Muhammad. Because of his well-devised plan, no one was able to find him. The prophet and his friends stayed in the cave for 3 days. During the nights, they were kept informed of all news and developments of what was occurring in Mecca. After 3 days, the prophet, Abu Bakr, and their guide took the Red Sea route to Yathrib to ensure their escape. After 10 days' journey, Muhammad arrived safely in Yathrib. That day in mid-June, 622 AD, marked the beginning of the Islamic calendar and the founding of the Muslim nation. Muhammad was well received in Yathrib, and the people named their city Madinatu an-Nabi, the city of the prophet, or Medina for short. Not long after his arrival, the prophet built the first mosque from which he began delivering his messages. Along with this spiritual development, the prophet made other social and political developments in the city. These developments served to establish peace and strengthen the bonds amongst the people in the city. He established a peace between 2 major tribes in the city. He also established a transitional league of brotherhood between the Meccan emigrants and the Medinan Muslims. With the 13 Jewish tribes living in Medina, he forged a treaty called the Constitution of Medina, which ensured everyone's freedom and safety, people's political rights, freedom of belief, freedom of enterprise and trade were protected. Also, this constitutional document spelled out individual citizen obligations, sanctity of life, prevention of crime, laws of municipalities, and the dignity and equality of people governed under the law.
Prophet Muhammad established a charter or a constitution which clearly established the rights and the duties of non-Muslims, and in particular of Jews and Christians within the community. And there was an alliance.
There were alliances between Muslims and Christians and alliances between Muslims and Jews. Therefore, the idea that we are all descended from the same Abrahamic religion holds true.
The Constitution of Medina really demonstrated the extent to which Medina was not simply a Muslim city or a Muslim community. That in fact Medina was to be a community that incorporated people of other faiths.
Here in Medina, the prophet was reaching out to the Jews. He was teaching the Muslims and Jews who attended his sermons what was revealed to him from the stories of Moses, Jesus, and other Israelite prophets. Also, the Muslims were told to face Jerusalem in their prayers, like the Jews and Christians did.
As we also know, early on, the prophet expected that Jews would, in time, accept the message of Islam. And indeed, the early Muslims faced Jerusalem initially. However, when it became clear that that acceptance wasn't going to come, the Quran revealed to Muhammad that the direction of prayer be changed to Mecca.
Regarding Muhammad's grand work in Medina in establishing law and order, Karen Armstrong, in her book, Muhammad, A Biography of the Prophet, stated, "Unlike Christianity, which came to birth under the Roman Empire, where the social and political orders were already established, and Jesus and St. Paul had to mainly worry about the spiritual order, Arabia had no political or social order. Under this constitution, Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived in peace and harmony. All of the pact began with the Meccan Quraysh leaders summoning all its confederates, 10,000 people, and marched towards Medina with the intention of finishing off the Muslims. This was a year after the Battle of Uhud. The battle ended peacefully without an actual fight because the Muslims dug a deep ditch between the flatland of Medina and the mountains outside the city. They strategically placed their soldiers on the mountainous side and along this ditch. The Meccans were taken by surprise when they were faced by the ditch and were unable to cross it or penetrate the Muslim defensive lines. After 40 days of siege and attempts to engage the Muslims in a battle, Quraysh soldiers gave up and returned home. Muslims believed their struggle, or jihad, paid off in preventing another bloodbath and a major loss of life.
War has to be avoided as much as possible. For this reason, Islam says that you should be strong. If you are strong, your enemies will not attack you. There will be no war.
Muhammad sent several expeditions to the rest of the tribal communities of Arabia, announcing their strong presence and making alliances with them before Quraysh did. Although these early battles made a significant psychological outcome, the resulting casualties were quite small. With all three battles combined, casualties from both sides were less than 200 people. While Islam's beginnings were full of troubling times, battles, and hardship, at no time did Muhammad seek to compel followers to the new religion. To Muslims, there is no compulsion in matters of faith.
Islam absolutely forbids compelling people, coercing people to accept Islam. La ikraha fid din. Very categorical statement. There is no compulsion allowed in matters of religion. In many other places, the Quran says you cannot compel people to accept the faith. So only convey. In the countries where Islam is spread, you still have Christian groups, Jewish groups, Zoroastrian groups, people of many other faiths.
Between the battles for self-preservation against the Quraysh tribes, the way Islam spread throughout history, or some of the more recent events in the world, the Quran is one of the most misinterpreted books of any religion.
To interpret the Quran, you need a number of things. First of all, you need a very thorough command of the Arabic language, that for Muslims, the Quran is revealed in Arabic. And just linguistically, understanding the language becomes so important. Then understanding the context. How did this verse, or how did that verse come to be revealed? What was the context in which these verses were revealed? How do these fit into Islamic history and interpretation? It's not that you can interpret the verses totally different from how other people have done that. You're free to interpret the verses, but you're bound by the fact that these really are God's words for all people in all times.
Because Quran is a universal document. It is for all time, for all places, for all people, but it certainly came at a particular time, to a particular person, in a particular language, in particular circumstances.
Each text that talks about fighting and violence has to be seen in terms of when was that revealed, in what context did it appear. And therefore, for example, one may see a passage like slay the unbelievers wherever you find them. Okay. But often, number one, that passage is quoted out of context, and often only the first part of the passage is quoted. In most of these passages, the verse then goes on to say, but should they stop fighting? When they stop fighting, then remember that God is compassionate. One has to stop fighting. And so many of these passages are dealing with instances in which the community is under siege and the community is being told to fight and to fight back, and that the community has the right and duty to do that. But the other thing that's interesting is that at times when it says slay the unbelievers wherever you find them, the unbelievers being referred to are the Meccans.
The word jihad denotes physical, moral, spiritual, and intellectual efforts exerted for a particular goal.
The very term jihad in Arabic means to strive, to struggle, to exert oneself in the path of God. Jihad fi sabil Allah, struggling in the path of God. Its primary meaning in the Quran means the struggle to realize God's will. A Muslim is one who submits, one who follows God's will. And so in many ways, it indicates what every believer has to do. Every believer, whether Muslim, Jew, Christian, etc., struggles in this world to be good, to be moral. to live up to one's faith. And that's the primary meaning of jihad.
The Quran teaches that war and bloodshed is always abominable. Diplomacy and reconciliation are divine mechanisms to restoring peace, security, and hope.
Violence is to be avoided as much as possible. It is something which is evil, which is bad.
When the Muslim state was strong enough to defend themselves and were no longer afraid for their lives, they pursued reconciliation with the Meccans. For example, during the 6th year from his migration to Medina, the Prophet, with 1,400 people, peacefully moved toward Mecca to conduct the ritual of the Lesser Pilgrimage. The Quraysh leaders, however, sent 50 horsemen to block the main route of the pilgrims and to attack the Muslims as they approached. Even though the Muslims were many folds greater in number and could have attained an easy victory, the Prophet took a different route through the narrow and rocky canyons that were extremely difficult to cross in order to reach Mecca. When the Muslims realized they would not be allowed to perform their ritual, they negotiated with Quraysh a resolution for peace known as the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. The treaty, among other things, called for no war for the next 10 years, and that the Meccans are to allow the Muslims to perform the Lesser Pilgrimage in the following season. Many of Muhammad's companions were dissatisfied and angry and felt it was humiliating to sign such a treaty. Karen Armstrong, in her book, A Biography of the Prophet, stated, "Muhammad was a peacemaker who risked his life and nearly lost the loyalty of his closer companions because he was so determined to reconcile with Mecca. Instead of fighting an intransient war to the death, Muhammad was prepared to negotiate and to compromise. And this apparent humiliation proved, in the words of the Quran, to be a great victory."
The Prophet was in an area of Arabia in which you had tribal warfare. And Arabia was located between two massive empires, the Sassanid and the Eastern Byzantine Empire, who were themselves warring among themselves. The Prophet brought peace to Arabia. He brought Islam, and Islam, submission to the will of God, the religion of Islam was to transcend all tribal and ethnic affiliations. And so he brought peace to Arabia.
Islam absolutely forbids attacking people who are innocent. Islam says you should not initiate violence. The Quran says do not aggress against those who do not aggress against you. So even in the difficulties and problems, try to see that the Quran says that when people do wrong to you, you should do good to them, so that this is the way you can bring friendship and good relation.
The Prophet's wisdom in making peace and uniting his people did not stop at only political treaties, but he used the social customs of Arabia to overcome factions and animosity in the land. Who he married is an example of this. The Prophet married Hubayba, the daughter of the Quraysh leader Abu Sufyan. Later he married a Jewish lady, Sufiya, the daughter of the chief of the Nudair tribe. The Prophet also married a Christian lady, Maria. Even though both these ladies accepted Islam, these marriages are symbols showing that Islam transcends barriers. It also shows that Islam seeks to build bridges and relationships with other communities and other religions.
The Prophet in his own personal life often sought to bring about that peace through diplomacy, and indeed through a number of his marriages. So when we look at the marriages of the Prophet, they occur for a number of reasons. He married widows, but the Prophet also was involved in marriages, much as later on we see rulers involved in marriages that cement relationships with other tribes.
A chronological timeline of the marriages of the Prophet reveals the role of these marriages to bring about peace. The Prophet married his first wife, Khadijah, at age 25. She was a widow of age 40. They stayed married until she died. He was then 50 years old. He stayed single for the next 3 years until the age of 53, when in Medina the Prophet married his second wife, Aisha. In the next several years, during the reconciliation with Quraysh and the tribes surrounding Medina, he made the rest of his other marriages. These marriages were instrumental in ending the violence and securing lasting peace. The Prophet used other social customs to create peace and friendship.
When the Prophet was in Medina, he noticed the Jews fasting on a particular day, and he asked them, why do you fast on this day? And they explained to him that this was the day in which God had saved Moses. And so for the Prophet Muhammad, the idea was that this was just as important a day for Muslims as it was for Jews. And so the Prophet Muhammad fasted on that day too. In the Islamic calendar, it's the 10th day of the month of Muharram, the day of Ashura. And so Muslims still fast on that day, similar to the Jewish understanding of fasting.